Thank you very much, Brandon. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, new friends, people I know and people I don't know. It's really good to be here today. And I think a very special word of congratulations to Gillian and Brandon for organising this magnificent conference, which is a culmination of a lot of work, but I think it's also an opportunity to showcase the kind of things that INCOR have been doing and to provide a platform for people like yourselves with so much expertise to come here to Belfast and to share your experiences with us. This is a particularly personal experience for me because I have known Brandon and indeed his colleague Gráinne Kelly since I arrived back here in Belfast back in 2004. Those of you who don't know much about our peace programmes, we've been lucky for the last 20 years to have a thing called the peace programmes. We're in the fourth generation of the peace programmes now. For the first two generations that went from about 1995 up to about 2006, we spent quite a lot of time, I suppose, building partnerships on the ground and so on. But we also travelled quite a journey through that time in asking ourselves, what do we mean when we talk about reconciliation? What do we mean when we talk about building the peace? And I remember back in 2004, we commissioned a piece of work from from Gráinne and Brandon to address that question. And they came up with a 5-strand understanding of what reconciliation is, which has really been at the heart of everything we've been doing since then. Their 5 strands were quite simply, firstly, the need to build positive relationships at a local level based on an acceptance of the differences and an understanding that we have to share this piece of land together. The second piece of it was to build economic and political change, and that is something that has been happening both through the peace programmes but generally through the whole sort of momentum of what's been happening here in Northern Ireland since the peace arrived. The third strand is acknowledging and dealing with the past. It's right at the heart of it there. And I think it's great that today is really about all of that, and this project sits right in the heart of that. The fourth strand, building a shared vision of the future. And the fifth strand, moving towards significant or fundamental changes of attitude and behaviour. 5 very simple, but I think very meaningful pieces of thoughts, let's say, which, as I say, certainly from 2004 onwards, have been at the heart of our work on the peace programmes. So much so that in Peace 3, which is where this project got its funding, the 4 pillars of the Peace 3 programme were, firstly, to build positive relationships at a local level. And in that, we worked very closely with local authorities and community groups, both within their local communities, but also region-wide, in that sort of multi-annual challenge of building positive relationships between the communities and the diverse sort of constituencies in this part of the world. The second pillar, we called it acknowledging and dealing with the past, and that's where this project fits in. And there we did everything we could to work with the victims, with groups of victims, both through provision of services, but also the development of our understanding of that whole thing, but linking it also to this whole question of acknowledging and dealing with the past, finding out ways of talking about the past, finding new methods, new vocabulary, new approaches. And that's where this project sits. The third pillar was shared spaces, and I'll just mention 2 examples of that. One is the bridge in Derry, Londonderry, the Peace Bridge, which I think is a perfect example of the sort of thing we were trying to do for a city like Derry, to open it up and to build a link between 2 sides of the city that had been divided for so long. The other one I'd mention is the one here in East Belfast, the Skenos project, which again is another example of a shared space at an interface which has, I think, generated quite a lot of dialogue and interaction between the communities in this part of the world. The fourth pillar was building capacity for a shared future. Now, that was always intended to be an outward-looking pillar, looking internationally. And we have had some success in doing that. Not as much as I would have liked, but we have had some success, and I think it's something that we would like to be building for the future. I was privileged recently to be able to bring a group of about 20 people from the peace programs over to the Basque Country, where we exchange experiences with people there around what we are doing and the conditions and circumstances that they are sharing here. And I see Irache here from Guernica, from the museum. It was an extraordinary experience that day in Irache, in the museum. And this is, I suppose, where we get to the whole question of accounts of the conflict. That whole experience of that museum in Guernica, you walk in, and it's not about telling you facts or giving you information. It's about an experience that touches every one of your senses, your brain, your heart, but also your gut, your stomach. You end up in a dark room which transforms itself into a kitchen of a lady on the day of the bombing in Guernica. And you go through that morning's experience with her. And so you share that with her. So accounts is not just about a collection of intellectual sharing of facts. It's about getting into the experiences of it. I was very impressed also in some of the blog work on your website, the temporary website, reading the contributions from Bern Harris from South Africa and from Professor Lean from States in relation to that whole. I was very touched by the South African experience of accounts must also lead to healing. And that whole challenge of what sort of healing do we actually manage to achieve. But also the community of stories. I think Gillian uses a lovely phrase, a collection of collections, which is what this account of the conflict is meant to be. So it's trying to go in that direction of pulling together the accounts, and very much the story of many different voices, many different accounts. The hostile voices, the dominant voices, and what Bern Harris calls also the disavowed voices. So sometimes it can be very uncomfortable at the table listening to conflicts. And the challenge is to be able to stay in the room. Stay in the room and listen. Stay in the room and continue to hear. And I think hopefully that is something that this will encourage us all to do. It's a website that's available to researchers. It's available to the media. It puts on record what has happened. And it puts on record many different stories. We have some other projects within the program. I'd mention one or two. One is the Crows on the Wire project, which actually takes a look at the experiences of the RUC officers and the transition that they made to the PSNI and that whole personal experience from their perspective. There's another one called The Theatre of Witness, which brings together people who suffered dreadful losses and violence in their families, and brings together people whom we might call perpetrators, ex-combatants, paramilitaries, whatever you like to call them, with the families and the victims, and how they managed to find a way of communicating with one another. Powerful stuff, quite challenging, but as I say, I'm very happy that the programme has managed to contribute in some way towards this. It is a long, complex, difficult road. We have only just started, and I think Gillian also says in her notes that this is just a start. The accounts of the conflict is just the start of the process. Long road to go, but we need the tools, we need the wherewithal, we need the vocabulary, we need the material, and I think that this helps us to actually do that. Looking to the future, Piece 4 is on the way, thankfully, hopefully sometime early next year. 4 big themes. Number 1 is youth. Number 2, education, which again were themes that came up in some of your seminars, the importance of these things as the challenges for the future. The third one is continuing the work of shared space. And we hopefully will also continue to work, and the fourth theme for the new program will be this building positive relationships at a local level. So we have a long and very meaningful relationship with INCOR and with its staff and its people who've had a major significant contribution to the peace programs. And I'm very happy that this particular project is here today. And that, again, it's a culmination, I think, of an outcome of the work that we've been doing together over the years. And I commend it to you all. And thank you very much for listening to me today. Thank you.